Welcome back. South Korea and the U.S. have resumed their large-scale military training after a 4-year halt. For more on the ongoing Ulchi Freedom Shield amid tensions on the Korean peninsula, I have Dr. Bruce Bennett from RAND Corporation live here in the studio. Of course, Dr. Bennett, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
I also have Professor Kim Jae-chun at Sogang University joining our session virtually. Professor Kim, it's good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Dr. Bennett, we'll start here then. North Korea has yet to specifically respond to this particular ongoing military drill, but based on its remarks, prior remarks that is, what can you deduce perhaps about Pyongyang's current sentiment with regard to the Ulchi Freedom Shield?
Well, I have to imagine that Kim Jong-un is scared to death. When we think of North Korea attacking South Korea, we usually assume that will come out of an exercise, when its troops are most prepared and most ready to act against the South. And so for Kim, he's got to be mirror imaging us and thinking, oh, well, then U.S. is going to try to do the same kind of thing. So I think he's scared. I think he's angry. He does not like it. He has tried to stop the exercises many, many times. And I think he's also hoping that he can use this with his people to convince them that the U.S. is really an enemy and they've got to be prepared to sacrifice to deal with the United States and with South Korea, and that we don't really want good things for his people. So those give us also then opportunities to identify things we could be doing to counter his responses.
Right. Professor Kim, now this is the first large-scale military training since the Yoon administration took office back in May. How does this compare to previous drills under former administrations?
Well, during the Moon Jae-in's presidency, large-scale military exercises, joint military exercises between ROC and the U.S. had been virtually all suspended. Key Resolve, Fall Eagle, and Ulchi Freedom Guardian, they had been all suspended or downsized to the extent that we couldn't even call them real exercises. You know, President Moon wanted to expedite what he called a Korean peninsula peace process, you know, all these inter-Korean communications and economic cooperation, and North Korea sort of presented suspension of these exercises as a precondition for inter-Korean dialogue. And not only Moon, but American President, former, of course, Trump, wanted to cancel these exercises because he wanted to negotiate with Kim Jong-un. And also he complained about the costs, you know, that these exercises are too costly. So it was the agreement between the US and South Korea to scrap these big-time military exercises. And now it's complete reversal from the previous administrations, and not just in South Korea, in both countries, because current administrations in both countries sort of agreed to resume all these joint military drills, and that included Key Resolve, Fall Eagle, and Ulchi Freedom Guardian. And the exercise that we just had in past several days was Ulchi Freedom Shield, as you said, formerly Ulchi Freedom Guardian. And I think what really separates this exercise from the exercises in the previous administration is the sheer size of it. You know, Ulchi Freedom Shield was a large-scale exercise that included field training, you know, field exercises, which didn't really take place during the previous administration.
Right. Dr. Bennett, President Yoon Suk-yeol has also called for the strengthening of the three-axis system. Do you care to elaborate?
Oh, absolutely. So starting after the North Korean second nuclear test, South Korea became concerned that they couldn't just ignore North Korea having nuclear weapons. They needed to prepare procedures to respond to it. They had missile defense that they had been building already, but they have gone on to augment that and build it significantly. But they also recognized that missile defense is imperfect. It can leak, it can be overwhelmed. And so a key they recognized was that they also needed a kill chain kind of capability, a capability to destroy the attackers before they launch. Now, most people will say, oh no, that's destabilizing, because then you have to preempt them. It doesn't work that way. North Korea has always built many missiles for every launcher. And so after they launch their first missile, There are still hundreds of missiles out there sitting in underground facilities that the US and South Korea could be destroying if we've got the capability, if we know where, and if we have the capability to destroy them. Then, after the 4th nuclear test and the 5th nuclear test, South Korea said, we have to recognize that deterrence is important. And that led to the Korean massive punishment and retaliation. The only thing Kim Jong-un really cares about is himself. That's what he's concerned about. And so that was a way of threatening him and telling him, if you execute an attack on South Korea, you won't survive it. And the US has mirrored that in our discussion. If you use a nuclear weapon, you will not survive it, Kim Jong-un.
Right, I see a stern warning right there. Professor Kim, meanwhile, there has been talk about North Korea planning to modernize its fleet of Air Force fighters with those from Russia. What more can you tell us?
I think it's not just Russia that is trying to modernize North Korea's Air Force fighters. I think China is also trying to modernize North Korea's Air Force, which is in sort of decrepit condition. So we can say that Russia and China are sort of vying with each other to upgrade and modernize North Korea's Air Force. I can't really say it for sure, but in my opinion, Russia is a little ahead of China in this endeavor because Russia has this, signature jet fighter, MiG, MiG-35. But one downside of MiG is that it's a little bit pricey. It's a little expensive, and Chinese developed fighters are a little cheaper. Anyways, North Korea is expected to modernize its fleet of Air Force fighters on a major scale. Why? It's a part of their 5-year weapons modernization plan, the plan that Kim Jong-un announced a couple of years ago. And Russia then has taken an interest in North Korean plans. Maybe it's a way of Russia to get back at the United States, the United States that has been frustrating Russian war efforts in Ukraine.
Right, I see. And Dr. Bennett, generally speaking, what are North Korea's military capabilities?
Well, they have a very large military. That's important when you compare it to how small South Korea's military is getting. But they're not very high technology, as Dr. Kim has said. So what we have to then look at is say, let's go back to 1980. Kim Il-sung knew what was happening. He knew there was no way he could compete with the technology that South Korea and the US could field. So what did he do? He decided to start building weapons of mass destruction. He builds nuclear capabilities, he builds chemical and biological weapons, and he's built capabilities that will offset his negative capabilities on a conventional side to overcome the South. The problem is it took decades for all of that to develop, but now it's there. And we have to recognize that he's not going to fight a conventional war. He knows that if he invades South Korea with conventional capabilities only, he will lose. And so he is thinking about using those capabilities if he ever goes to war. And that's worrisome because it's not clear we're really ready for nuclear weapon use, chemical use, biological weapon use. We plan to talk about that tomorrow when we release our latest report on that.
Right, which is why you're here in South Korea.
Exactly.
And staying with North Korea's capabilities, Professor Kim, some say North Korea's cyber war capabilities currently pose more of an immediate threat than its military programs. How do you explain this reality?
It's a little bit ironic, isn't it? I mean, because North Korea is probably one of the most impoverished countries in the world, and its infrastructure of technological development is falling way behind. And these conditions don't seem to allow North Korea to possess the kind of cyber warfare capabilities to pose major threats to the Korean Peninsula. Yet North Korea's cyber capabilities are a major security threat to the Korean Peninsula. I think it has to do with a number of factors. First, North Korean regime has put in real efforts to train these world-class hackers. So these hackers are really good. And second, it's the nature of cyberspace or cyber war, if you will. What I mean by this is that attackers in cyberspace always enjoy a considerable degree of anonymity. It's very difficult to trace these attackers. So in cyberspace, the offense has the upper hand. So for North Korea, strengthening the cyber capability is a very cost-efficient means to sort of counterbalance the growing gap in traditional, conventional military capabilities between the two Koreas. And now they could launch malicious software attacks, malware attacks, online bank heists, hacking attacks, you name them. So it could really disrupt the stability and peace on the Korean Peninsula, and actually maybe beyond the Korean Peninsula. That's my assessment.
Right. And staying with that, Dr. Bennett, I understand this will be a tough question, but how can South Korea and the U.S. seek to better respond to these threats by North Korea?
Well, I think we have to recognize that if the growing threats that are problematic to us are things like nuclear weapons and chemical and biological, the U.S. has tried to go to North Korea and negotiate these things away. But Kim isn't only refusing to negotiate, he's building more and more. So we're at a stage where we have to take these seriously. At the end of the Cold War in 1990, roughly, we turned our attention to terrorism. We paid attention to these lower level kinds of threats. Now it's time for our two countries to get back to worrying about weapons of mass destruction, about nuclear weapons, and how you defend against them. And there are ways that can be very effective, but we have to be prepared to make some significant investments, and we have to do the planning of how you make it all work. We have to then convince Kim that he cannot succeed if this is what he does.
Right. Professor Kim, the Yoon administration's latest proposal of an audacious economic development plan for North Korea was crudely condemned by Kim Yo-jong, while her brother Kim Jong-un remained mute. What are your thoughts on these roles by the two siblings and their broader implications, perhaps?
Well, it seems that there is a division of role between these two siblings. Kim Jong-un is using more refined language, and then he's trying to look like a more calm and restrained leader, whereas his younger sister, Kim Yo-jong, is using all these foul language, and she doesn't really have any qualms about calling names. So in a way, there is a, good cop, bad cop division of role here, but for about 2 weeks ago, if my memory serves me correct here, Kim Jong-un, during this speech, did single out Yoon Suk-yeol, President Yoon Suk-yeol. Actually, he didn't say President Yoon Suk-yeol. He just said Yoon Suk-yeol, and Yoon Suk-yeol is a military thug, and Yoon Suk-yeol is going to pay for what he's been doing and what he has been saying. So good cop, bad cop role division is not that proper anymore. I don't know, but what has attracted my attention more is how Kim Yo-jong, this female in this very, very male chauvinistic society, now has become probably the second powerful person in North Korea. The way she has been wielding political power is quite amazing, and that there is a very little doubt that Kim Jong-un trusts his sister very much. So if something happens to Kim Jong-un, I don't know, if Kim Jong-un dies all of a sudden, I think Kim Yo-jong is there to succeed his brother, although it's not going to be that easy.
Right. Dr. Bennett, moving forward, the new UN expert on human rights in North Korea is here in South Korea, starting on this Monday, that is. What on her agenda looks to be of interest given the status quo? We're talking about Elizabeth Salmon.
Well, I think we have to recognize that North Korea doesn't want to hear anything about human rights because that's damaging to the regime. I mean, even their elites know that they could be dead tomorrow. And they could be abused, they could be sent off to a prison camp. So this is something which they want to submerge, not have be in the news, not have international attention. The fact that the UN person is coming to Korea is great, because it gives us a chance to highlight the fact that this is an important part of what being a reasonable and acceptable country is, that we honor human rights. And so I think she's here to do that. But it also gives us an interesting lever on Kim Jong-un, because it allows us to say, you want to do these provocations, missile launches, nuclear tests, there are things we could do that you will really hate, like raise your human rights record very actively in the media if you continue. And that gives us an opportunity to say that. I hope our two governments do that.
Right. Professor Kim, government officials here and over in the US have been claiming that North Korea is close to conducting a 7th nuclear test. Do you share this outlook? And if so, what countermeasures do you propose?
I think all the evidence suggests that North Korea is technically ready, technically prepared to conduct a nuclear weapons test for the 7th time. So if they decide, if they make up their mind, I think they can do it anytime they see fit. But I think there are two lingering questions, at least in my personal opinion. I think there are two questions that might be lingering in the minds of Kim Jong-un. First, what are they going to prove this time? You know, what do they really want to accomplish? Because they have already proved that they had credible hydrogen bomb capabilities, you know, strategic nuclear weapons capabilities. So if there's going to be another nuclear test, what are they going to prove? They have to prove something different this time. It has to be about, I think, their tactical nuclear weapons capabilities, you know, small nuclear weapons with smaller nuclear warheads with lower yield and less nuclear fallout. But the question is, are they really ready for this? So that's my first question. And second, if they conduct another nuclear weapons test, I think it could raise many eyebrows in China and also possibly Russia. Sure, Chinese and Russians, they basically gave a go sign to a series of North Korea's missiles testings this year, but another nuclear weapons test, I think it's a very different matter here. And about a month ago, Chinese ambassador to the United Nations clearly said that China is opposed to North Korea's nuclear weapons testing for the 7th time. Sure, China, also Russia, they want to confront the United States on the Korean peninsula. But that said, nuclear weapons testing is going to be maybe too much of a destabilizing factor, both to Chinese and Russians. So I'm not really sure whether North Korea will go ahead and conduct nuclear weapons testing for the 7th time. You also asked me how we could cope with the North Korea's nuclear provocation. I think we don't really have any option but to stay united and keep sending this message, keep imparting this message to North Koreans that if there is going to be another nuclear weapons test, there's going to be very, very heavy price that you guys will have to pay.
Right, as Dr. Bennett said, the consequences will be quite tough this time.
Yes.
All right, Professor Kim, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Dr. Bennett here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Happy to do so.
Thank you.